The Windhover by Gerard Manley Hopkins. To Christ our Lord. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dapple dawn-drawn falcon in his riding, of the rolling level underneath him steady air, and striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing in his ecstasy, then off forth on a swing, as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow band, the hurl and gliding, rebuffed the big wind, my heart in hiding, stirred for a bird. The achieve of, the mastery of the thing, brute beauty and valour and act, oh air, pride, plume, here buckle, and the fire that breaks from thee then, a billion times told lovelier, more dangerous, oh my chevalier. No wonder of it, sheer plod makes plough down Sicilian shine, and blue bleak embers are, my dear, fall, gall themselves and gash gold vermilion.
Welcome to Litpoetry. The Windhover is one of Gerard Manley Hopkins' most celebrated poems. Though the poem was written in 1877, it was only published after his death in 1918. Dedicated to Christ our Lord, the Windhover is a poem that is religious and written by Hopkins, who converted to Roman Catholicism while studying at Oxford University. Hopkins, who went on to become a Jesuit priest, actually burned all of the poems he wrote in the belief that his love of poetry was in conflict with the demands of his Catholic faith. Fellow poet and colleague Robert Bridges, however, retained copies of all of Hopkins's poems and made certain they were published following his death. Even though he wrote during the Victorian era, Hopkins's poetry was unusual and progressive for its time. Hopkins' decadent use of poetic devices, aerobic turn of phrase, and his distinctive use of sprung rhythm were noticeable parts of his poetical style. The Windhover, which illustrates these hallmarks well, was regarded by Hopkins himself as the finest poem he ever wrote. A lover of musicality, of language, in the Windhover we witness a gifted poet reaching for a language worthy of capturing a glimpse of what he saw as God's creation, a created world that, according to Hopkins, was imbued with God's Spirit itself, described in the poem as the fire that breaks from all things. Clearly, when compared to Matthew Arnold's poem, Dover Beach, written at a similar historical time about the decline of faith in society, and already featured here at Litpoetry, we get a much more optimistic message about the state of faith in our world. To finish with, it should be pointed out that Hopkins' fluid and rich style of poetry was very instrumental in shaping the outlook of some poets of the ilk of Dylan Thomas, T.S. Eliot and W.H. Auden. Form, metre and rhyme. The Windhover is a Petrarchan sonnet, a 14-line poem divided into an octet, the first 8 lines, and a sestet, the final 6 lines. Hopkins also uses 2 3-line stanzas known as tercets inside the final sestet. The octet and the sestet traditionally function as a kind of question and answer. In this poem, the octet raises questions about the beauty of the Windhover to engender a sense of awe and wonder. The sestet then marks a shift where the poem's focus becomes more abstract. Here, the poem widens its orientation to ponder the manner in which the bird's grace, skill, and beauty is an expression of the majesty of God, a majesty that, according to Hopkins, and as we have already seen, is present in all things. The rapture of the tone of the poem basically turns the poem into a hymn of praise and gratitude for the beauty of the created world. The last 3 lines of the poem, having soared to great lyrical heights, become literally more down to earth, making reference to ashes and soil and expressing admiration for the way the spark of life burns within the earthy and common things of this world as well. Meter. Hopkins' poetry is known for its sprung rhythm, where poetic lines generally have a mostly regular amount of accents or stressed syllables, but a varied number of unstressed syllables. In other words, while other poets of the Victorian era might have adhered to stricter meters such as iambic pentameter, Hopkins's poetry is more organic and unpredictable. It mirrors normal speech, but avoids the sometimes contrived feeling that can come through an overly formulaic use of iambic pentameter. The rhythm of sprung lines usually starts with a stress, followed by a number of unstressed beats. There is no need to get caught up in the technical details here. The point is where the stresses actually occur. Other than the first line, no other lines in the poem strictly conform to iambic pentameter, which is part of what makes Hopkins' poetry so alive and magnetic. And then we turn to the rhyme scheme. Rhyme is used throughout this Petrarchan sonnet. However, the entire octet rhyme scheme ends in the ing sound, with some of the ing sounds being stressed and others not. Case in point, we have the word wing, and then we can compare that to the word riding. You can see a very clear difference. The octet's scheme then, the pattern, basically is all A's, with some being very loud and others being a lot softer. The capital letters in this scheme mark stressed syllables and the lowercase mark the unstressed. The most important thing to notice about the rhymes in the octet is the way that most of them refer to action and movement, riding, striding, wing, swing and gliding. This helps build the picture of the kestrel as a master of aerial skills, manipulating the wind to hover and dive at will. The rhymes in the sestet follow a different sort of pattern of CD, CD, CD. Poetic devices, alliteration. The Windhover is filled to the brim with alliteration. That's one main purpose overall, is to make the poem sound beautiful and majestic. Furthermore, the effervescent and repeated use of alliteration relates to the way that the speaker projects a state of rapture onto the act of observing the Windhover. This ecstasy and delight is a type of religious fervour that almost turns the poem into a kind of prayer of adoration. The alliteration that starts the poem is vivid, intoxicating, and comes in a group of three: morning, morning's minion, daylight's dolphin, and dapple, dawn, drawn, falcon. These alliterations all sound clear and sharp, mirroring the sense of wonder being experienced by the speaker. Starting with the word riding in line 2 and wimpling wing in line 4, the alliteration serves more to capture the way the Windhover can oscillate between hovering and diving. Combined with the meter and rhythm, this creates a sense of both stillness and movement, just like the rhythm the bird follows in the air. They parallel each other. Next, in lines 5 to 6, the alliteration delivers the poem a gracious and smooth simile about the bird's movement being like that of the heel of an ice skater on the ice. Pay attention to the S's, then off, forth on a swing, as a skate's heel sweeps smooth. The next alliteration to notice occurs in lines 9 to 11. Brute, beauty and valour and act, oh, air, pride, plume, here, buckle, and the fire that breaks from thee then a billion times told more lovelier, more dangerous, oh my chevalier. As with all the other instances in the poem, the alliteration here still works to maintain the presence of beauty and deliberate design, but here its use also creates and captures a sense of power through the hard B and P sounds. These have a kind of toughness that matches with the description of the kestrel's beauty as brute. This B sound then links with the speaker's statement that Christ is even more lovelier and dangerous, 1 billion times more. The 3 hard G sounds in the final line return to the brightness of the opening, suggesting the intensity of the fire that burns inside all of God's creation, gall, gash and gold vermilion. Ending the poem with a colour means that this bright sound also leaves the reader with a lasting impression of reddish gold. Assonance. The Windhover also uses an abundance of assonance, which creates textures of sounds that reinforce the beauty and mastery being described. Hopkins here uses the linking of vowel sounds to illustrate orally the skill of the Windhover displayed as it rides on the currents of air. That, in turn, as well as the divine craftsmanship that Hopkins believes God is demonstrating in his creation, create musical notes like a symphony. The vowels go to work, as in this line, I caught this morning's minion. Just listen to those vowels. This is a strong opening where the brightness of the vowel sounds reinforce the speaker's sense of wonder for the bird. Then, dapple, dawn-drawn falcon suggests that the kestrel's spotted feathers have been painted by God. Painted with skillful precision even. The Windhover is like a work of art. Phrases that follow, like in his riding and striding high, create a quick tempo and organic feel that reflects the aerial abilities of the bird. In line 7, we have the phrase big wind, which works a little bit differently, suggesting the wind's power, but in turn, the bird's ability to use that wind to its advantage. While in line 8, the internal rhyme of stirred and bird link the speaker's profound emotion with the kestrel itself. The vowels are generally less speedy in the final stanza. Plough down in line 12 evokes the tough work involved with ploughing soil, while fall, gall is a sudden, unexpected, perfect rhyme. This unpredictability speaks to the way that God's majesty expresses itself in all things, and that this intensity lurks beneath the surface of reality. But how to glimpse it, as the speaker did with the Windhover, is not always immediately apparent. Caesura and enjambment. The Windhover uses caesura throughout the poem. The most important general effect is the way that this creates a sense of pressure and delivery. Hopkins puts his lines under great pressure by ensuring that a line ending rarely fits with the end of the sentence. Most of the actual sentence endings are due to caesura inside the lines. This signals the poet's control of poetic language, skillfully taking the sonnet form right to its limits, and thus suggesting the kind of master craftsmanship used by God in creating the world. Another general effect, and one which is crucial to the poem's first stanza, is the way that the caesura, enjambment, and the line length combine to mimic the bird's aerial abilities. That is, the Windhover can hover or swoop without any notice, surfing the air currents on the lookout for quarry and using gravity to hurtle towards the earth when it has to. It's unbelievable writing. The poem does this too. Just examine the way the poem seems to pause and then resume its motion in the opening 4.5 lines. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dapple dawn-drawn falcon, in his riding of the rolling level underneath him, steady air and striding. It is just really astounding when you listen to it. Notice here how the poem seems to be suspended right when the bird itself is in mid-air, high there, before reaching an aesthetic height in the exclamation mark caesura of line 5, pressure and release, push and pull, rise and dive. These are images of precise attunement to the natural world. Celebrating the divine in the natural world. The Windhover is perhaps a kind of joyous prayer, a celebration that wonders at and affirms the beauty of the natural world, and in turn gives honour to a creative force that Hopkins believes is behind it all. The poem attempts vigorously to show that the nature of God and the natural world are really not separate. The beauty of nature is both evidence of and a way of experiencing the divine, while the later half of the poem develops the way that natural beauty relates to God. The first part of the poem brings nature to life on the page. In the first stanza, the speaker is almost dazed by the splendour and audacity of the falcon. The poem's language is fittingly full of its own glittering beauty here, through the poetic devices that we've listed above: alliteration, assonance, enjambment, sprung rhythm, caesura, you name it. As the speaker attempts to articulate this sense of rapture, indeed, the emotional impact of this encounter is clear from the start when the speaker catches the bird's escapades in the sky. The word catch here is really interesting, kind of stumbles across it. The speaker then gapes at the wondrous features of the Windhover, each one magnificent in its own way. The falcon's dappled feathers, its ability to smoothly hover in the strong air currents, the way it swiftly turns and dives, presumably to catch prey. All of these affect the speaker profoundly. This emotional reaction comes out, and comes about because the speaker sees in the wonder of the Windhover proof of God's existence, beauty and power. In other words, the falcon doesn't just exist for the sake of it, it exists to express something beyond itself, something divine. With the first part of the poem illustrating the prowess and glory of the falcon, the sestet places the bird in a wider and arguably more mysterious context. The speaker admires the falcon's brute beauty and valour and act, its fearlessness and physical abilities, but importantly, sees these as proof of a type of metaphorical fire that also breaks from Christ, to whom the poem is dedicated and to whom the poet rigorously worships as part of his Catholic faith. This fire is God's creation. However, no matter whether you read Hopkins' poem as an atheist, an agnostic, or a theist, there is something in this poem for all readers, despite the thick religious language and associations that might put some readers off. And that is because deep below the religious language is the expression of a fundamental, universal human experience, that of joy and rapture in life, that rare experience accessible by all human beings, no matter their religious sensibilities. It doesn't really matter. Everybody is capable of being drawn into an experience that is beyond and outside oneself, into an experience of otherness, self-forgetfulness, exhilaration and praise for something beautiful and glorious in and of its own self. A woman who has just given birth often knows this same experience, as does perhaps a lone surfer sitting out on a break all by themselves in the midst of Mother Nature, being overwhelmed by the things outside themselves. In other words, while pleasure plays such a central role in people's lives today, the type of joy Hopkins is describing is not like normal pleasure that we so commonly lust for and seek after. It's more virtuous and healthy. Too often pleasures in our world, the ones that we pursue, are merely acts of consumption or vanity. But joy, pure joy, brings with it the experience of escaping the prison of our own selves, and it is a rare event to be truly cherished. The Windhover helps us to remember the importance of joy and delight, and reminds us that being fully human is an act of celebration and gratitude of life. What's more, The poem goes on to argue that the beauty to be found in life is not only found in magnificent creatures like a bird, but within all things. Like embers fallen from a fire, even unremarkable surroundings can contain intense gold vermilion and then profound beauty. As an example, the speaker mentions the mundane and repetitive task of ploughing the soil, which brings the reward of food and sustenance. A secondary, less literal meaning of this sheer plod could be the way that human beings serve God by staying true to mundane tasks, like simple acts of kindness, which one day will be revealed as being laced with honour and grace. In the end, I really have to commend this poem, not for its religiosity, but for the sheer fact that it's one of the rare poems that pulls you out of yourself and helps you to celebrate the beautiful world around us. Thank you.